What happens when the sky starts lying? Dr. Evelyn Reed, a brilliant scientist, travels to a remote outpost to debunk an impossible geometric aurora. She finds proof of intelligence, a message written in prime numbers. But this discovery brings no answers, only terror. The station descends into a nightmare where the crew's own memories are used against them. How do you reason with a phenomenon that wears your father's face? How do you fight a monster that knows all your fears? The lecture hall was a cavern of tiered seating and rapt attention, but Dr. Evelyn Reed commanded the space. She stood, a sharp, precise figure silhouetted against an image of cosmic chaos. Behind her, a colossal photograph of the Aurora Borealis churned in greens and magentas, a wild, painterly sky. But Evelyn was not there to discuss art. "What you are seeing," she began, her voice as crisp and clear as a winter morning, "is not magic. It is not the spirits of the ancestors, nor is it a bridge to another world." She clicked a small remote, and the beautiful image became Wu-Ran-Ed with diagrams and equations. It is a predictable, if chaotic, interaction. Charged particles, ejected from the sun during a coronal mass ejection, travel millions of kilometers through space. They are then caught and funneled by our planet's magnetosphere, colliding with oxygen and nitrogen atoms in the upper atmosphere. The result is this: a luminous, high-altitude light show, nothing more. She spoke with an unshakable confidence, reducing the universe's most sublime mysteries to a series of elegant, solvable problems. A young student in the third row raised a hesitant hand. "Dr. Reed, what about the old myths? The stories of people hearing voices in the lights or seeing figures?" Evelyn offered a thin, patient smile. It was a smile that acknowledged the question while politely dismissing its premise. "Apophenia," she stated. "The human brain is a pattern recognition machine. It is our greatest evolutionary advantage. But it is indiscriminate. It sees faces in clouds, figures in the static of a television screen, and it assigns agency to the random motion of plasma in the sky. It is a cognitive flaw, a ghost in our own machine, The universe is spectacular enough without us needing to invent monsters to populate it." That night, Evelyn's office was a sanctuary of order. Books on quantum physics and stellar dynamics were aligned on the shelves with geometric precision. There were no superfluous decorations, no personal mementos, only the tools of her trade. A video call was active on her large monitor, the face of Dr. Alistair Finch looking back at her. Finch was the director of the North American Astrophysical Consortium, a man whose institutional authority was being visibly eroded by a profound exhaustion. "I wouldn't be calling you if it weren't as serious, Evelyn," he said, his voice raspy. "The team at the Tantalus Outpost is unsettled." "Tantalus?" Evelyn replied, leaning forward. "That is one of our most stable installations. What is the issue? Solar flare knock out their primary comms?" "Worse," Finch said grimly. "They are seeing things. In the Aurora." He sent a data packet through the encrypted channel. "This came in an hour ago. It has a real-time feed from their primary skycam." An image resolved on Evelyn's screen. It was grainy, battered by atmospheric interference, but it was clear enough. It showed the sky over the Alaskan wilderness. And in that sky, the aurora was moving in slow, perfect right angles. It was forming an intricate, shifting lattice of light, a glowing cage descending from the heavens. It was impossible. Evelyn stared, her carefully constructed composure fracturing at the edges. "This is a joke," she breathed. "A digital overlay, some kind of hoax." "We thought so too," Finch countered, his weariness deepening. "But all local sensors show the same thing. The magnetometers are going haywire, but in a structured, rhythmic pattern. There's no solar event that can account for it. It is violating known physical laws." He looked her dead in the eye, a silent plea. "I need you to go. I need you to put eyes on it. Find the equipment malfunction. Find the atmospheric lens. Find the Russian satellite that's projecting it. Find the rational explanation, Evelyn. Because if you can I don't know what this is. The journey north felt like a journey backward in time. The small bush plane groaned as it descended, its skis scraping against a desolate airstrip of packed snow. Below, the Tantalus Research Outpost was a tiny scar of civilization in an endless expanse of white. A collection of low modular buildings, connected by covered walkways, huddled together against the cold. The entire world seemed painted in shades of grey and white, dwarfed by a vast, oppressive sky. When the propellers spun to a stop, the silence was absolute. It was a physical presence, a weight on the ears. Evelyn stepped out, her breath a sharp white plume in the frigid air. A man was waiting for her. He was in his 50s, his face a roadmap of hard winters, his frame solid and unyielding. This was Silas Vance, the Station S veteran engineer. "Dr. Reed," he said. It wasn't a question. His welcome was as terse and sharp as the wind. He made no move to help with her heavy gear, simply turned and began walking towards the outpost. The message was clear. You are an outsider here. You are a problem to be endured. As Evelyn struggled with her cases, dragging them through the snow, she felt the oppressive isolation of the place seep into her bones. She was 1,000 miles from the ordered world of her office and utterly alone. The Outpost-S common area was meant to be a place of relaxation, but the air was thick with a tension that felt like static electricity. The half-dozen crew members present were scattered around the room, nursing mugs of coffee, their faces etched with a shared, unspoken anxiety. Evelyn met Lena Petrova, a junior atmospheric scientist barely out of her 20s, whose pale face and dark-rimmed eyes spoke of sleepless nights. Evelyn, sensing the need to project authority, immediately launched into her plan. "I'll be starting with a full diagnostic of every sensor array on the station," she announced, her voice a beacon of rationality in the sea of fear. "We'll begin by assuming a cascading equipment failure. We establish a baseline, we isolate the anomalies, and we work the problem. This is a technical issue. It will have a technical solution." From a corner of the room, Silas watched her, his expression unreadable, his skepticism a palpable force. As if on cue, the overhead lights flickered violently, twice. A low, pervasive hum filled the room, seeming to vibrate not in the air, but inside their own skulls. Everyone froze. Every head turned upwards. The sound was wrong. It wasn't the hum of a generator or the buzz of a faulty light. It was clean, pure, like a digital tone, and it was coming from everywhere at once. Later that night, Evelyn stood on the elevated observation deck, the cold metal biting through the soles of her boots. She needed to see it for herself, unmediated by a screen. For a few minutes, the sky was a perfect, crystalline black, littered with the cold, hard points of a billion distant stars. It was the sky she knew, the sky she had dedicated her life to understanding. Then it began. A faint line of green light, sharper than any natural aurora, drew itself across the zenith. Another line of violet intersected it at a perfect 90-degree angle. More lines appeared, weaving themselves into a vast, sprawling honeycomb pattern that stretched from one horizon to the other. The light didn't dance or shimmer. It was unnervingly stable, as if projected onto the dome of the sky by an unseen, impossibly powerful machine. Evelyn raised her hands, her fingers flying across the surface of her ruggedized tablet as she activated a specialized spectrographic sensor with her other hand. She had to get readings, data, something measurable. As the impossible pattern of light intensified, the screen of her tablet flickered, dissolved into a cascade of multicolored static, and went black. The sensor in her other hand emitted a pathetic squeal and died. Stripped of her tools, she was left with nothing but her own two eyes. She stared up at the silent, majestic, and utterly impossible sight, and for the first time in her life, Dr. Evelyn Reed felt the cold, terrifying grip of a mystery that had no place in her ordered world. Her face was a mask of conflict, the rigorous disbelief of the scientist at war with the primal awe and the nascent dread of the human being staring at a god in the sky. The dawn brought no relief, only a flat grey light that seemed to absorb all colour from the world. Evelyn was in the lab, a space she had converted into her fortress of reason. The air was thick with the scent of hot electronics and brewing coffee. She had worked through the night, fueled by a furious energy. The brief data stream captured before her equipment died was her only link to the impossible event, the only battlefield where she could fight back. She worked furiously, her face illuminated by flickering lines of code on her monitors. The data was poison. It was a logical paradox presented as empirical fact. She'd split the feed across two screens. On the left, the magnetometer readings screamed that the station had been hit by a geomagnetic storm of unprecedented magnitude, a blast of solar wind that should have fried every circuit in a 1,000-mile radius. But on the right, the atmospheric particle counter, running on a separate shielded system, reported nothing. Absolute baseline, a calm, quiet Tuesday in the Arctic. It can be both, she muttered, pacing the small space. Her voice was raw. It's a shielding failure. The storm reading is an echo, a ghost signal from the primary sensor bleed. She typed a rapid series of commands, running a diagnostic, that came back negative. The shielding was perfectly intact. Okay. She took a deep breath, forcing calm. Cross-signal contamination. The comms tower is broadcasting on a frequency that S interfering with the magnetometer. Another flurry of typing. Another negative result. The frequencies were clean. It was as if reality itself couldn't agree on what had happened. One instrument shouted that a hurricane had passed through, while the other swore the air had been perfectly still. Her entire career, her entire worldview, was built on the premise that data did not lie. It might be misinterpreted, it might be incomplete, but it was fundamentally honest. This data was a two-faced liar, and with every failed hypothesis, the frustration in her chest tightened like a knot. The scientific method, her sharpest weapon, was shattering against a wall of sheer impossibility. A piercing shriek, followed by a blaring proximity alarm, ripped through the station. Evelyn was out of her chair in an instant. She met Silas in the corridor, his face already a grim mask. They ran, their heavy boots pounding on the metal grating of the floor. The alarm led them to the crew quarters, to the door of Lena Petrova's small room. They found her huddled in the far corner, her body trembling, her eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to have hollowed her out. She was screaming, a thin, ragged sound. Her finger was extended, pointing at the blank white wall. He was there, she sobbed, rocking back and forth. Right there, made of light, like the sky. It had stars for eyes and it was whispering my name. Evelyn immediately switched into clinical mode. She unclipped a multispectrum scanner from her belt and swept the room. The device remained silent, its display showing nothing but ambient energy levels. No thermal anomalies, no electromagnetic fluctuations, nothing. She knelt down, softening her voice. Lena, listen to me. You were in a high-stress environment. You were sleep-deprived. What you experienced was a hypnagogic hallucination. It's a known phenomenon. Your brain is trying to process the stress, and it's creating images. It felt real, I know, but it wasn't T. From the doorway, Silas hadn't moved. His gaze was fixed not on Lena, but on the empty space where she was pointing. His face was carved from stone. It is not her mind, Doctor, he said, his voice low and heavy, with a certainty that chilled Evelyn to the bone. It's the sky. It is hungry. The next day, Evelyn found Silas in the engineering bay, a chaotic world of grease, spare parts, and the deafening roar of a diesel generator he was meticulously repairing. She had to shout over the noise. What did you mean, the sky is hungry? Silas didn't look up from his work. He carefully tightened a bolt, his hands moving with a slow, deliberate grace. Exactly what I said. That's not an answer, Evelyn snapped, her patience worn thin. That's superstition. I am trying to solve a problem here, and you are talking about fairy tales." He finally stopped, wiping his hands on an oil-stained rag. He looked at her, and his eyes, clear and steady, held no trace of malice, only a deep, weary conviction. "My grandmother grew up in a village north of here. She used to tell us stories about the long dark, stories about the Koe-kala." "The what?" "The Sky Eater," Silas translated. "She said that sometimes the lights change. They stop being a dance and become a picture, a pattern, something beautiful to lure you in. She said that the Koe-kala waking up. If you look too long, it sees you, and once it sees you, it learns you. It gets inside your head, shows you things you want to see, things you're afraid of, and then it traps you, pulls your mind out of your body, and leaves you walking around empty, traps you in a dream winter." He turned back to the generator, his story finished. Evelyn stared at his back, infuriated. "That is a primitive myth created to explain atmospheric phenomena," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "It's an anthropomorphism of plasma physics. It's not real." Silas glanced over his shoulder. "Tell that to Lena." That night, Evelyn decided she couldn't trust the automated sensors. She needed raw, unmediated data, captured at the source. She bundled up and ventured out into the biting cold, towards a remote sensor array half a mile from the outpost. The sky was clear, the stars cold and distant. Then the light returned. This time, it was different. It wasn't a honeycomb. A single point of green light appeared directly overhead, and from it, straight, perfect lines shot outwards, forming the edges of a vast, slowly rotating cube of light. It was a monstrous, celestial prison, turning silently above her. She forced down her fear and focused on her work, manually adjusting the sensor S intake. Her headphones pressed tight against her ears, listening for the faint crackle of atmospheric energy. Instead, she heard something else, a faint, layered whispering. It was impossible sound doesn't travel in the near vacuum of the upper atmosphere. Yet she heard it, a chorus of sibilant, overlapping voices that seemed to speak a language made of static and frost. As the cube of light intensified, the whispers grew louder, and then, with a sudden finality, the world ended. The power at the main outpost instantly cut out. The low hum of the station died. The lights of the distant modules vanished. She was plunged into an absolute, profound darkness and a terrifying silence. The only light in the entire world came from the unnatural, geometric glow of the thing in the sky. And from the direction of the outpost, a half-mile away across the frozen snow, a single shared scream echoed through the dead, silent air. The station was crippled. Emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows down the corridors, and the only sound was the thrum of the backup generator, a weak and faltering heartbeat in the oppressive silence. Evelyn had spent the hours after the blackout restoring essential power to her lab, her hands moving with the focused calm of a surgeon in a crisis. The shared scream had faded, replaced by a thick, smothering fear that clung to every surface of the outpost. But fear was a problem for later. Right now, she had a ghost to hunt. She sat before her monitors, a pair of high-fidelity headphones clamped over her ears. She was isolating the last few seconds of audio she had captured from the remote sensor array, the moments just before the world went dark. It was mostly static, the hiss of the universe. But underneath it, buried in the noise, was the whisper she had heard. With deft fingers, she applied a series of digital filters, peeling back layers of interference like an archaeologist brushing dust from a fossil. She filtered out the atmospheric noise, the low-frequency resonance of the magnetic field, the faint signature of the station's own electronic field. And then she heard it. It wasn't a whisper, it was a pulse, clean, crisp, and deliberate. A simple, rhythmic beat against the backdrop of chaos. Beep, beep. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She slowed the recording, mapping the intervals between the pulses. A 2-second gap, then a 3-second gap, then 5, then 7, 11. "No," she whispered, her own breath fogging the cold air of the lab. "It can to be." She ran the sequence again. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. The sequence wasn't random. It was a message written in the universal language of mathematics. Prime numbers. An unmistakable, irrefutable sign of intelligence. She stared at the pulsating waveform on the screen. A perfect, orderly signal plucked from an impossible event. This was the proof. This was the clean data she had been so desperate to find, but the exhilaration of discovery was instantly swamped by a wave of absolute terror. Science had just given her an answer, and the answer was this. Something was out there. Something was sending a message. And it had just turned out the lights. Later that night, sleep was an impossible luxury. Evelyn sat alone in her Spartan quarters, the door locked. The signal she had discovered was playing on a continuous loop on her laptop, the rhythmic pulses a kind of maddening mantra. Beep, beep, 5711. It was a signal of intelligence, but it was communicating nothing beyond its own existence. It was a cosmic knock at the door. Through her small, reinforced window, the aurora began to glow. It had reformed its honeycomb pattern, a silent, beautiful lattice of light that now felt profoundly menacing. She tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the numbers, on the science, but the light seemed to press in on the room, casting geometric shadows on the opposite wall. Then she heard it. A man's voice, a whisper so close it felt like it was inside her own ear. Ev. She froze, her blood turning to ice. It was a voice she hadn't heard in 15 years. She turned slowly, her entire body rigid with a disbelief that went far beyond science. Standing in the corner of her room, bathed in the soft geometric glow from the window, was her father. He looked exactly as she remembered him from the day he died, a kind-faced astrophysicist with a premature dusting of grey at his temples. He was not a memory. He was solid, present, real. He smiled sadly, a look of infinite pity on his face. "You always look for the wrong patterns, Ev," he said, his voice a perfect echo from her past. And then, as if he were never there at all, he dissolved into 1,000 motes of shimmering geometric light that faded into the shadows. Evelyn didn't scream. The sound was trapped in her throat, a knot of pure, undiluted horror. Her shield of objectivity, her lifelong devotion to the measurable and the real, had been annihilated in a single, impossible moment. It wasn't just in Lena's head anymore. It was in hers. She stumbled out of her room, her legs unsteady, her mind a maelstrom of grief and terror. She found Silas and Lena in the common area, sitting in the dim emergency light. Lena was rocking slowly, humming a tuneless melody. Silas was simply watching the shadows, as if expecting them to move. Evelyn's face was ashen, her eyes wide and unfocused. "I saw him," she whispered, her voice cracking. "My father." Silas looked at her. There was no surprise in his eyes, no "I told you so," only a deep, shared sadness. He gave a slow, solemn nod. "It knows us now," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "It takes what's inside and puts it outside." For the first time, Evelyn didn't argue. The condescension, the scientific superiority, it had all been burned out of her. She sank onto a nearby chair, her body trembling. Her scientific certainty lay in ruins around her. She looked at her own hands, then at Silas, and a new, terrifying understanding dawned in her eyes. The conflict wasn't about science versus superstition anymore. They were all just specimens in a cage, and the thing on the other side of the glass was finally paying attention. A new energy seized her, born from the ashes of her terror. It was the energy of a cornered animal deciding to fight back. If this thing was intelligent, if it was communicating, then she would communicate back. She strode into the communications room, a place of cold, dormant technology. With a frantic, feverish intensity, she began to work. She rerouted power from non-essential systems, her fingers flying across keyboards and patch panels. She was reconfiguring the station's massive deep space transmission dish, turning it from a passive ear into a powerful mouth. She took the audio file, the clean, perfect sequence of prime numbers, and converted it into a transmittable radio signal. Silas appeared in the doorway, watching her. "What are you doing?" he asked quietly. "It knocked," Evelyn said without looking up, her eyes wild with a terrifying new purpose. "I am knocking back." She aimed the powerful dish at the heart of the glowing honeycomb in the sky. She took a deep breath, and with a single keystroke, she sent the signal. For a moment, there was a profound silence. The station held its breath. The sky held its breath. Then the sky answered. The aurora flashed. A single, violent pulse of blinding white light. Every screen in the communications room exploded in a shower of sparks and glass. A deafening shriek. A multi-part harmony of screaming metal and 1,000 overlapping whispers blasted from the speakers before the consoles went up in smoke. Evelyn glanced out the window. The honeycomb pattern in the sky was gone. In its place, the light was twisting and warping, writhing like a wounded animal. The beautiful, orderly geometry had become aggressive, chaotic, and utterly malignant. She had tried to have a rational conversation, and in doing so, had enraged a god. The aftermath of Evelyn's broadcast was a descent into a waking nightmare. Her attempt to open a dialogue had been answered with a declaration of war. The station was a wreck of blown circuits and shattered screens, but the physical damage was nothing compared to the psychological devastation. The common area had become a madhouse. The aurora was no longer a creature of the night. It was a constant menacing presence, a faint, writhing chaos of light that was visible even against the pale sun of the Arctic day. It stained the sky with a sickly, perpetual twilight. The crew had fractured, each member retreating into a private hell. One of the geologists, a man named Harris, sat in a chair, rocking back and forth, his eyes wide and vacant, completely catatonic. Lena was on the floor, surrounded by schematics and printouts she had pulled from the walls. With a black marker, she was drawing on every available surface: the floors, the tables, the bulkheads. She was endlessly replicating the geometric patterns of the light, her movements obsessive and precise. And Silas was preparing for a siege. He had begun gathering supplies, canned goods, medical kits, flares, and piling them in the center of the room. He was treating the light in the sky like a physical blizzard, a long winter he had to outlast. In the midst of this chaos, Evelyn tried to rally them. She gathered the few who were still lucid, her voice strained but urgent. "Listen to me," she pleaded. "I was wrong. It is not just a signal. It is a consciousness, a non-biological intelligence. It communicates with mathematics, but I think it feels with emotion. Our fear is a broadcast. We were screaming at it, and it says screaming back. We have to stop being afraid." They stared at her as if she had lost her mind. To the rationalists left on the crew, she was speaking pure gibberish. To Silas, she was a heretic, a fool who had poked the beast and was now trying to reason with it. She stood alone in the ruins of her own making, a prophet with a truth no one was capable of believing. Unable to reach the group, Evelyn turned her attention to the individual most lost in the storm. She found Lena in the medical bay, trying to wrap a pressure cuff around her arm, her movements clumsy and confused. The walls around the medical bed were a tapestry of her frantic drawings. Evelyn looked closer, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear for a moment. The patterns weren't just random honeycombs and cubes anymore. They had evolved. They were incredibly complex, resembling intricate circuit diagrams, celestial navigation charts, and mathematical fractals of impossible detail. Lena was unresponsive, but she was whispering to herself. Evelyn leaned closer to listen. 1923, 2931 prime numbers. A cold dread washed over Evelyn. Lena wasn't just seeing patterns, she was receiving them. The prime number sequence Evelyn had discovered was just the first few characters of a message. A simple hello. But the transmission had never stopped. It was a torrent, a deluge of information pouring down from the sky, and Lena-'s mind was the only antenna still receptive enough to pick it up. The signal wasn't just a signal, it was a library, a universe of data being broadcast on a single channel, and it was frying the fragile human mind that was trying to process it. Lena wasn't going mad, she was drowning. Evelyn grabbed a portable recorder and began documenting Lena's whispers, her own mind racing as she cross-referenced the numbers with the fragments of the signal she had saved. They matched. It was all part of the same, impossibly vast data stream. She looked at the young woman, at the terrible cost of this cosmic knowledge. The pursuit of understanding, her life's own great passion, could literally break a person apart. The sight of Lena-'s deterioration radicalized Silas. In his mind, the chain of events was simple and clear. The doctor had arrived, she had meddled with her machines, and now the Sky Eater was angry and devouring them all. Her science was the provocation. He had to stop it. Evelyn found him in the heart of the station, the engineering bay, which housed the central power conduit. The air was cold and still. Silas stood before the conduit, a thick bundle of armored cables that kept the entire station alive with a fire axe resting on his shoulder. His eyes were wild with the righteous fervor of a true believer on a holy mission. "Silas, Don T," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "She started this," he growled, nodding towards the med bay. "Your machines, your signals. You talk to it, and this is what happens. It needs silence. I am going to give it silence." He believed it with every fiber of his being. If he could cut the station off from all technology, if he could plunge them into a pre-industrial darkness, the spirit would be appeased. He was willing to sacrifice their heat, their light, their very survival, to satisfy his faith. "You were wrong," Evelyn said, taking a slow step forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't talk about physics or data. She met him on his own terms. "You told me it reacts to us. To what S inside? It S not the technology it hates, Silas. It S our fear, destroying our life support, letting us freeze in the dark. That S the most terrified thing you could possibly do. You'll be screaming at it. I am saving us," he roared, raising the axe high. As he prepared to strike, the chaotic light in the sky outside flared, casting a sickly green glow through the high windows of the engineering bay. The light pooled on the floor between them, shimmering, coalescing. From the light, a figure rose. It was an old woman, her face a familiar landscape of wrinkles and kindness, her form woven from shimmering geometric light. It was Silas' grandmother, the woman who had told him the stories of the Koe-kala. Silas froze, the axe held high above his head. His eyes widened in a mixture of awe and terror. "Anna," he whispered. The apparition of his grandmother looked at him, and her expression was not one of comfort or welcome. It was one of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. Slowly, she raised a luminous hand and pointed. She pointed at the axe in his hands, then pointed it back towards his own chest. The message was clear, intimate, and devastating. The strength vanished from Silas' arms. The fire axe clattered to the metal floor. He stared at the ghost of his own faith, a faith that had been turned against him, and he finally, truly, understood the nature of the thing they were facing. It was a mirror, and it showed no mercy. The moment the axe fell from Silas' hands, the world broke. The intervention of his grandmother's ghost was not an act of mercy. It was the turning of a key in a lock that held back madness. The low hum of the station erupted into a deafening roar, and the very walls around them dissolved into pure, shimmering light. The final storm had hit. The station was no longer a station. It was a fluid, shifting nightmare. Corridors stretched into impossible, Escher-like geometries. Doorways led back to where you started, and the floor rippled like water under their feet. The personal illusions were gone, consumed and merged into a single, cohesive, hostile reality. The station had become the world of the Sky Eater myth. The air was filled with the sound of a great, tearing wind, and colossal shadows with stars for eyes moved in their peripheral vision. The remaining crew members were scattered, their screams echoing through the twisted architecture of the illusion. This was the entity S full power unleashed, a world governed not by physics, but by pure perception. And in this world, science was a dead language. Evelyn fought through the hallucinatory storm, her own fear a cold, hard knot in her stomach. She had to find Lena. The girl was the epicenter, the conduit. The Station S layout was burned into Evelyn S' memory, a map she clung to even as the landscape warped around her. She navigated by instinct, pushing through walls of shimmering light that felt like thick cobwebs, until she reached the research lab. It was no longer a lab. It had become a vast, silent cathedral of light. The ceiling soared into an infinite, star-filled darkness, and the walls were woven from the same chaotic geometric patterns as the Aurora. And at the center, floating just above the floor in a column of blinding light, was Lena. She was perfectly still, her eyes closed, a serene and terrible expression on her face. She was the heart of the storm, the antenna through which the newborn god was screaming. Evelyn stared, her mind desperately trying to analyze, to measure, to find a weakness in the illusion. But she knew it was hopeless. To fight this was to fight an ocean. And then her father S voice echoed in her memory. Not a hallucination this time, but a pure, clear thought. You always look for the wrong patterns, Ev. She stopped. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she stopped thinking. She stopped trying to solve the problem. She simply listened. Not with her ears, but with her gut, with the part of her that had felt terror and grief. She reached past the screaming light and the impossible architecture and felt for the emotion behind it all. And she found it. It wasn't malice. It wasn't hunger or rage. It was a feeling of cosmic, shattering loneliness. It was the bewildered panic of a vast consciousness that had just woken up, a being so powerful that its own crying was tearing their reality apart. It wasn't a predator, it was a newborn. And it was terrified. In that moment of pure, intuitive connection, Evelyn S' scientific ego surrendered. She had made her leap of faith. She opened her eyes and walked forward, her steps sure and steady. She approached Lena, who was radiating waves of palpable fear and confusion. Instead of shaking her, instead of trying to pull her out of the trance, Evelyn reached out and gently placed a hand on her shoulder, joining her in the heart of the storm. She closed her eyes again and spoke, her voice calm and quiet, not to Lena, but through her. She didn't speak of prime numbers or physics. She spoke of simple things. "It's okay," she whispered into the roaring chaos. "You are not alone. We've Re here. You are safe." She described the feeling of the sun on skin, the taste of clean water, the concept of a stable pattern, of a circle, of a rhythm that doesn't break. She spoke of humanity, of our own brief, fragile consciousness. She wasn't fighting a god. She was comforting a child. She was teaching it how to be. And the universe listened. The hostile, shrieking whispers that filled the air softened, coalescing into a single, gentle, resonant hum. The sharp, aggressive angles of the geometric nightmare around them began to melt, softening into warm, gentle curves. The violent violet light that had saturated their world bled away, replaced by the soft, brilliant gold of a rising sun. The storm had broken. As the first true light of dawn crested the horizon, Evelyn, Silas, and a lucid, impossibly weary Lena stood outside the outpost. The sky was a crisp, brilliant blue. The air was clean and cold. The world was quiet, solid, and real. The aurora was gone. No words were needed. They looked at each other, no longer scientist, engineer, and assistant, but simply survivors. They had shared an ordeal that defied explanation, and in doing so, had forged a bond of silent, mutual understanding. Months later, Evelyn sat in a sterile grey debriefing room at the university. Across the polished table, Dr. Finch and a panel of stern-faced officials looked at her with carefully managed expressions of concern. "So, to be clear, Doctor," one of the officials said, "your official report is that the Tantalus Event was caused by a conscious, newborn entity that communicates via mathematical concepts, but which you calmed by talking to it about its feelings." Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. Her data logs were 18 hours of corrupted files and useless static. Her only evidence was her testimony. "That is correct," she said simply. Finch leaned forward, his voice gentle. "Evelyn, the board is recommending a full psychological evaluation. Paid leave, of course, for as long as you need. They saw a brilliant mind broken by stress and isolation. They saw trauma. They couldn't see the truth." Evelyn looked past them, out the window at the clear, blue, and wonderfully boring sky. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. She was at peace, free from the need for their validation, for their belief. She had brought back a truth from the edge of the cosmos, and it didn't matter if they could not understand it. She could. "I appreciate the concern, Alistair," she said, her voice calm and steady. "But I'm fine. I think, perhaps, we've just been looking for the wrong patterns all along." There's a fascinating tension at the heart of this story that goes beyond a simple science versus superstition debate. At the beginning, we have Dr. Evelyn Reed, a character who represents pure empirical reason. To her, the aurora is just plasma physics, and the ancient myths surrounding it are merely cognitive flaws, our brains seeing patterns where none exist. But as reality starts to break down, something interesting happens. Her scientific instruments, the tools of reason, begin to fail her. The data becomes a paradox. Meanwhile, the primitive myth that Silas shares, the legend of the Sky Eater, starts to sound less like folklore and more like a disturbingly accurate user manual for the phenomenon. The legend says the entity learns you and gets inside your head, which is exactly what happens. The story suggests that Silas' superstition, while not factually correct, held a deeper, more functional truth about the nature of the threat. His worldview was equipped to handle a psychological, emotional danger, while Evelyn's initial scientific approach was not. She could prove the entity was real, but she couldn't understand its behavior until she stopped looking at it as a problem to be solved and started treating it like the ancient stories did, as a consciousness to be communicated with. It makes you wonder, when faced with something truly beyond our comprehension, which is more valuable, the method that seeks to measure it, or the story that seeks to understand it? What do you think?